All right, Steeler fans, it is Monday, the Monday morning conversation right here on the Let's Ride podcast. I always have fun when I have this guy on my show. It's a good friend of mine. Never met him in person, but a good friend of mine, Chris Carter. What's up, Chris? How's it going?
I'm great, Jeff. How you doing, brother?
It's hot.
It's hot.
It's really freaking hot.
I like heat in general, but this is something else.
But I'm okay with it because I always tell myself mentally, I would rather have this than sub-freezing wind and snow or rain. I'd rather have the heat. So I'm going to embrace it, embrace the suck, as the Navy SEALs say and the Marine Corps say. All right. I wanted to have Chris on because you might not know this if you listen to Chris's Locked On podcast or read his material, but Chris actually has a law background. Now, Chris, I want to give you an opportunity because you were with me during the whole process. I remember talking to you all the time about how's it going, Pitt law, all that stuff. Give us your background before we dive into the topic.
I'm a graduate of Pitt Law School. Worked a little bit in the legal industry before I switched over to journalism full time. But was happy to graduate there. Worked in different legal offices. Did a lot of criminal work, before did some property here and there. But yeah, like I'm a graduate of Pitt Law. Loved my time there, and that was when Jeff and I met. Was when I was in law school, like virtually. We worked at Behind the Steel Curtain together, and then we did all those years of podcasting. And I'd be like, "All right, Jeff, gotta go. I'm studying for the bar. Bye." So that was those were good times. But yeah, so I preface anything when people ask me like legal questions, like, "Hey, I'm not practicing law or anything, but like I did study this. I worked around this, so I can give a perspective that might be a little bit more in tune with this world when we delve into it from a sports journalist aspect.
Yeah. So the reason why I wanted to have Chris on was I was listening to the Steel City Insider podcast, which the audio does run on the Steel Curtain Network podcast platform. And they were talking about Cam Sutton, and you brought up some legal aspects of things, and they quickly moved on. I understand why. It's a football show. And I was like, well, wait a second. Let's bring Chris on to the podcast on a Monday morning conversation to actually talk about this a little bit more. I want to preface whatever we're going to say is that we're looking at this from a legal perspective. We will talk about on-field stuff, but off-field, what was reported, and if you read the documents, is awful. Okay. So no one is saying that this isn't true or anything like that, but there's a lot of things that you need to know. We need to know as fans before we make, our own judgment on it. So Chris, take us through what we know now from a legal perspective.
So, okay. I want to preface this by saying, again, the thing is about this is that we do not know a lot of what actually happened in this incident that surrounds Cam Sutton. So the timeline begins with an initial affidavit filed by a complainant who basically, said Cam Sutton assaulted me, did all these terrible things. There was chokeholds, there was slamming, there was a lot of violence, there was biting, all sorts of allegations. But an affidavit is simply the form that the person giving this information to the police fills out. It does not mean that it is true. It's basically like, hey, this is my side of the story. So that usually leads to an investigation where the sheriff's office, I believe it was Hillsborough County, Florida, then goes to find the person accused to talk to them, and then the investigation will go from there. But the problem was they could not find Cameron Sutton when they were looking for him. And so that's what led to, after about a few weeks of looking for him and not being able to find him, they put it out to the media, and then it came off as Cam Sutton's hiding from the police. Now, it could be that could have been the case, but we don't know for sure because Cameron Sutton was working out in Detroit. And what I've posed is that, like, look, it doesn't mean for sure that he was running from the police. He could have, had a dispute and then left Florida, said, you know what, I'm going to go to Detroit where I work and where we have a house, and I'm going to work train there instead of Florida. But he could have been evading police. We don't know. But so what happens is that report gets out, it's publicized, it's put to ESPN. The Lions see it. They tell Cam Sutton. He's like, whoa. Then they cut him. He talks to his lawyers. They negotiate with the police. He turns himself in 11 days after the report. And then after he turns himself in, when this goes to court, it is not prosecuted. The charges were dropped from a felony to a misdemeanor. And then he was put in what's called a pretrial diversion program, which is basically He's going to take some classes. Once he completes these classes and these programs, the charges will be dropped from his record, and it'll be like nothing happened. It's not a settlement. It's not like the things that were tied to some of Ben Roethlisberger cases. It's just, hey, this has happened. We're doing this program, and the Cameron Sutton and this person, they've asked for their privacy, so we don't know. And when Cameron Sutton spoke at Steelers training camp or mini camp, when I was there, and I was there to see it, I think it was actually OTAs that he spoke. He would not address the situation at all. He just said, please respect my privacy. This is all I'm saying on this. We didn't learn anything new there other than, he thought that people were spinning narratives online. So breaking that down, if you want to assume that he did it, that he did these things in the allegations, that's fine. If you want to assume that he didn't do it, that's fine as well. We don't know for sure. And that is where, and the legal standpoint is from my understanding, when I see it, and I interned in the Federal Public Defender's Office. I worked for different criminal defense lawyers. In my understanding, when something like that happens, where the charges get dropped and you're put into this, either A, you didn't have a lot of the evidence, B, you had a clean record, so they really couldn't bring much on you, or C, the affidavit didn't hold up. So it's possible that those things. It's also possible that the accuser might have just said, you know what, I don't want to deal with this in court. I'm not following up on that affidavit. There's a lot of reasons for that. There's a lot of people that don't come forward with domestic violence situations because they think that they're afraid of people not believing them. And there's a lot of other circumstances there. So we can assume 1,000 different things, but the things we know are that there was an allegation. There were charges. The charges were lowered, and they will soon be clean from his record if he completes this pretrial diversion program. That is the legal standpoint that we understand right now.
And so the tough part about this, I think, for everyone involved, including the fan base, is that we just don't know. And we likely will never know, because if he does the diversion program and he's cleared of all the charges, it's literally going to come down to your own personal beliefs and opinions on what we know and what we've read online based on the public documents. Now, I do want to ask you a little bit about what you think, and this is your own opinion on the NFL's next steps. The NFL will suspend anyone for anything that they deem to be damaging to the Shield. I think they're going to suspend the guy. I'm sure you agree. The question is how severe do you think it'll be?
I believe it'll be a 6-game suspension, just looking at how they've done it before. It could be a 6-game suspension. It might get appealed down to 4 games. I think that with this kind of situation, the NFL takes this very seriously. I mean, this isn't the NFL of, what was it, like 2013 or 2014, when Ray Rice, knocked out his wife in an elevator, and it was put on camera. And remember, they tried to do like a 2-week suspension, and then people were saying, oh, and then they immediately were like, nah, he got to go, because that was completely just, they were getting destroyed in the media.
When the video was released by TMZ, it's just, you couldn't just do a 2-game suspension
for a cold call. And here's the other thing: like, if there was video on Cam Sutton, Steelers probably wouldn't have him right now. And that's the other thing, is that from the Steelers side of things, Cam Sutton, when he was with the Steelers, he was squeaky clean. There was not even any inkling of him being like a diva in practices or having a bad attitude with the team. He had a clean reputation with them, and I think that was a big part of why the reason he got signed for such a decent contract with the Lions is that here's a good player who's been a leader, who's been a good character person in the locker room and at least in the public eye. So that I think that played into it. So for the Steelers, when they see this and they hear that, maybe these charges won't go to the felony and he won't go to trial, that the Steelers reached out and they contacted him, and there's probably some discussion, and they probably did some investigating of their own, like, hey, how real is this? Because the Steelers don't want to be tied to something like this for a player that they'd be signing in free agency. There was talk of them almost letting go a franchise quarterback for allegations, many years ago with Ben Roethlisberger. So I'm sure the Steelers did their homework, didn't find anything, just like no one else is finding anything, and that being that there. So, but the NFL doesn't care what the investigation says. Like you said, if there's a blemish on the Shield, and especially around domestic violence, where they take it much seriously than they did maybe 10 years ago, then there's going to be a suspension. I anticipate 6 games. If Sutton appeals it, it might get lowered to 4, and then he's back in like October.
Which, correct me if I'm wrong, 2010, Ben Roethlisberger had that same timeline, 6 appealed down to 4, was it not?
Exactly. That's purely what I go off of. But also, like, we've also seen that, like, and people have done really funny segments on this and how the NFL suspension policies are basically like Wheel of Fortune. You just spin a wheel, you land on something. You know, like, it's 2 months or it's 1 game, and we don't know. But at least based off of what I understand of their precedent, it would be 6 games if Sutton appeals down to 4.
Yeah, and we laugh. It's not about domestic violence. Clearly, we take this serious, and like I said earlier, we will probably never truly know what happened, and that's a sad thing. And someone said this on Twitter. I was talking when they signed him, and they said, if there was a camera there, what would they say? Well, we don't have a camera there. This is not a Ray Rice situation, so therefore we just don't know. Before we switch gears and go to on-field stuff, sure. I wanted to ask. This could have been a PR nightmare. Okay, the Steelers signing Cam Sutton. Amidst the allegations, the documents that are public that are out there, you think they handled it well?
I think they handled it as well as they could. I think that I think the maybe the handling it well would have been not delving into it at all. And again, this is a person who talks to Cam Sutton in the locker room through. I mean, like when he was a rookie, that was my first like year of really getting to talk to players in the locker room after games and everything. He was one of the first players I felt a real connection with, who would share things with me, and I would be able to have conversations. And that's why, like, I remember when I first saw the ESPN story about this and being like, that Cameron Sutton? That's who this is? Like, I was just so shocked because I'm like, I never thought a guy like this could do this, but it's also a reminder, you don't know people just because you talk to them in a professional work setting. So it's still possible that he did do this. But I look at Cameron Sutton and the situation, and I think that with the information that we know right now, Jeff, what we don't know is out there. But I think that the Steelers and how they handled it, if they didn't bring him in, this wouldn't be a question at all. But the fact that they have brought him in, I mean, it hasn't blown up in their face yet. Now, here's the thing, Jeff, is if a video pops up or the accuser speaks and there's something else that develops in there, it'll be interesting to see how they handle that. But right now, they brought him in. They brought him to the media. We talked to him. Nothing came out. That's about all you can do, I think, if you're an organization and you are bringing him into the organization.
I mean, you know this as well as anyone that follows a team. The Steelers are very calculated with what they do. Yes. And so they brought him in at the very end of phase 3 of OTAs prior to mandatory minicamp, got him in front of the media. It's almost as if they said, let's just get ahead of this thing. Like, let's get this out of the way. Let's let him talk. He's not going to say anything anyways. And then hopefully by training camp, barring something, I would say, catastrophic to his case happening, like you said, the accuser comes out, pictures, videos, something of that nature. Then by training camp, hopefully it's water under the bridge and we move on. But I guess they handled it about as well as they could. Let's talk a little bit about on-field, though. And it's tough to switch gears from all the stuff that we just talked about to on-field. But he does help the Steelers defense a lot, wouldn't you say?
He does. I mean, here's the thing. And I've said this on the Locked On Steelers podcast. I've said this on the North Shore Drive podcast. But Cameron Sutton, everyone's going to look at his numbers with the Lions and say, why would you bring that guy in? He stinks. He was terrible. He was bad. That's just a terrible decision. But Cameron Sutton, like Dante Jackson, who they got from the Panthers, was really good as a number 2, number 3-ish cornerback in the Steelers system. When he was allowed to kind of work with other guys and not always have to follow a number 1 wide receiver like he did with the Detroit Lions, his numbers were very solid. Go look at it, the NFL passer rating when he was targeted in the years he had with the Steelers, especially his last year. I think he had 3 interceptions in his last year with the Steelers, several breakups, and he gave up 8 touchdowns with the Lions. I think that part of that's because he was asked to be something that he's not. And that's not a shutdown number 1 corner in the NFL, but put him in a system where he can be the number 2 corner or be your slot corner, and he's fine. And I think the real thing that he brings to the Steelers defense is this is Terrell Austin's system still, which he very much understood when he was with the Steelers. So he can go from a slot to the outside to the safety to strong, to help anywhere in the distance. And his strength beyond speed, beyond size, beyond ball skills was understanding where he fit in the scheme and knowing how best to help in the scheme in a myriad of ways. So to me, the flexibility of Cameron Sutton on the field makes a ton of sense for what the Steelers want to do and answers the slot cornerback question once his suspension's done. Because again, I fully expect a suspension to happen. But once he's back out there, unless Beanie Bishop or somebody really lights it up at the slot cornerback position, I see him going at the slot. Dante is the 2, Joey is the 1, Minka at free safety, Deshaun Elliott at strong safety, and then DeMonte KZ is an extra piece. And now you have a fully, I think, talented secondary that can be dynamic in several different ways. Dante Jackson, similarly to Cameron Sutton, when he was the number 2 guy behind Stephon Gilmore, really good numbers. When he was the number 1 guy, he was getting burned. So Joey Porter's going to be that guy. He's taking most number 1s. I talked to him in camp. He said he wants to follow number 1s. Terrell Austin was like, let's talk about that before we just do that. But I do think that's the plan, is to make him the number 1, have Jackson and Sutton kind of rotate between 2 and other duties in the secondary.
It's interesting because when you bring up the fact that we both make the assumption that Cameron Sutton is likely to get suspended, and then you go right back into what they were dealing with prior to signing him, and that is who's going to do that job, who's going to play that role of that slot cornerback, and is it a Beanie Bishop? Well, that's tough to say. He's an undrafted rookie. Like, to ask this guy to come in and do all that, I don't know. I don't know. I don't know if they have an answer for that right now. Training camp, that's going to be a battle definitely to watch. And the secondary, though, it does seem like they've kind of started to put the pieces together. If everyone can stay healthy, I just knocked on wood for all those that are superstitious. And I think they could have a really good unit. But I want to talk a little bit about another position that's been getting – I honestly feel like this is unnecessary noise. And it's the lull. It's after minicamp, before training camp. No one has anything to talk about. So let's dig into someone's quotes. Let's dig into someone's commentary, and let's try and argue about something. And of course, it's about the Steelers quarterbacks, and it's mainly about one Justin Fields. You've got one writer who's alluding that he's awful. You've got another writer saying that he's better than people think. You've been there. There's a lot of debate about who did well and who struggled. First, before you answer your thoughts on the Justin Fields talk, I want to ask you, how much stock do you put into the minicamp OTAs work for quarterbacks? Because for some position groups, it's pointless. Like offensive linemen, they're not blocking anyone. Yeah. They're literally just going through the motions. But for quarterbacks, how much stock do you, Chris Carter, put into their performance?
It's kind of like setting the table, right? Like, you know what? You might have some gourmet meal come out, but your presentation just wasn't that great. Like, you brought it out on paper plates and like you got paper plates and paper forks, but you come out and you getting the best steak in the world. Like, I think that what we saw with Justin Fields and what a lot of people are reporting on and talking about is, you know what, he did not come in, and there was speculation. Could he come in and overtake Russell Wilson? And the outtakes from minicamp was that's not happening. Like at least in the first, like, to lead into training camp, Russell Wilson's number 1, and there's a reason he's number 1. But like, it's funny. I had Mark Caboli on my Thursday show for the Locked On Steelers podcast, and we talked about this because it was his report from The Athletic that got aggregated and spread and blew up. And he's struggling. He's terrible. And Mark was like, I didn't say he was bad. I even say, hey, don't put too much into this. I just think that if I'm just categorizing winners and losers, he's a loser because he's not going to be the starting quarterback on this team. And we thought that there was a chance at that. So Mark and we talked about it on the show, but basically his whole thing was like, look, he does have inconsistencies, but that's exactly what we saw in Chicago. And he was not traded for by the Steelers to come in and light it up right away. Everyone knew that, hey, he's probably going to sit behind Russ. He's probably going to take some time. Maybe he comes up in the middle of the season. Who knows? I don't think so, because I think Russell Wilson will be better than some people believe. But I think everyone's just kind of looking at this, and I think there's just an acknowledgement that, like, hey, Justin Fields is still a work in progress in the NFL. He was with the Chicago Bears. Every quarterback that's ever been with the Chicago Bears has been a work in progress until they've not, or they left. And so I think there's some people who just say Justin Fields is done and finished and never talk to him again. But there's some people who think, like myself, I'm like, you know what? Let's see what he does in a system that works and an offense where he kind of fits into it and doesn't have to be the ultimate piece of it that makes everything happen, which is what Chicago was trying to do at times. And I think that could be the Steelers offense that Arthur Smith's putting together, with a strong offensive line, a strong running game, play action, use the deep ball. I think those are all things that could work in his favor, but it's going to take time. So I don't put a whole lot of stock into minicamp, and I think that what happens is there's just a vacuum of nothingness that happens at this time of the year. So every little thing gets blown up because people need content. People still need to get clicks. People still need to generate revenue. And that's not about Mark, and that's not about other reporters. It's often the aggregators that spin a couple words into this giant narrative that's just not real.
I think too, people underestimate the transition from one team to another. So one organization, because Justin Fields was the face of the franchise for his entire career. He's still really young, by the way. People also forget that. And so now he's in a new system. He's with new coaches. He's in a new city, new teammates. He's trying to get acclimated. I would be, if someone came in, now Russell Wilson is a veteran. He's a seasoned vet. He's already left his face of the franchise team in Seattle and gone to Denver. He's experienced what this is like. So he's been around the block. It's easier for him to transition into the Steelers system because he's been there, done that. Justin Fields is not in that realm, in my opinion, not yet, at least. So my question won't be, is Justin Fields out playing Russell Wilson this training camp and the mini camp? It's, is he improving? Yes. Are we seeing steps in the right direction? And you might have seen those already in little things in mini camp and OTAs, because maybe Tom Earth and Arthur Smith wanted him to do a drop back different than he did in Chicago. I mean, there's people that have, and they're even looking at his footwork in videos that are put out like by you when they're doing individual drills. I'm like, this is a little much. I mean, for me, but have you seen any type of improvement from Justin Fields from the moment he stepped into the facility to now?
Certainly. I mean, and you know, we're not allowed to talk about everything we see, but we can say what we're talked to about. And I think there's an acknowledgement that, like, this dude came into the building, was learning the offense along with everybody else. And he's starting to find some comforts. But here's the thing, is that Justin Fields, and this is something that carries over from his time with the Bears, that man, when he throws it, when he throws a deep ball, that's a laser. That's what everyone's really impressive, because he can just violently just cannon the ball out 50 yards on a rope down the field. The problem is, he also throws 50-yard, he throws 5-yard lasers that are cannons out too, and it's just like, look, we need to get the touch somewhere in here. It's all it's like if you play in Madden and you just holding down the button and it's all lasers and no floaters. And I think that's where Justin Fields has to learn a little bit more. But part of that comes with technique. Those are things that Tom Arth's working with. And like, you're right. Like, when I tweet out videos from minicamp, it's just to be like, hey, here's these guys. If you wanted to see what they looked like in a Steelers practice jersey, it's a nice spring day. Let's take a look at this. And then we see things breaking down. And look, as a person who got into journalism because I broke things down, I get the need and the want to look at those types of things. But those are the things that I'm also like, you know what? I'm cool. I don't need to do all that about this. I'm going to look at Justin Fields. Does he look completely lost? No. That's a good sign. We'll go with it from there. Let's see what he does in training camp. And again, training camp is also, with a grain of salt, because how many times have we gone into training camp and people think this and that of a guy, and then they turn out to not be that? I mean, even preseason. Look at Kenny Pickett in the preseason last year. Everyone, including myself, was like, this dude figured it out. They scored every touchdown every time they touched the field in the preseason. And then they came out, and last year was last year. So I just take it one day at a time, evaluate one day at a time, and we will see when he takes the field. Because there's also the chance that Russell Wilson gets hurt at some point, that he's not even gets benched. He's just injured, and Justin Fields has to take the field. And then when that day comes, we evaluate what's going there. And what we do is we just stack the days, set the table, bring in the nice fine china, the good silverware, eat the first course, eat your greens before you get to your meats, eat your starches, bring in all that, and then eventually get dessert. But take it one course at a time. Everyone wants to just be like, have a complete analysis. I saw a great tweet from someone on Saturday. It was just like, Justin Fields is going to throw one incomplete pass in a preseason game, and people are just going to be like, see, I told you he wasn't that good. And I'm just like, everyone holds your horses. This is a very long process to figure out how he moves forward.
I still have PTSD after last preseason, so don't bring that up, because that's. But before we move on, because I want to have some fun here at the end of the show with you, I think that as you talk about Justin Fields, and he's been the narrative both nationally and locally right now, this benefits one person the most, and that's Russell Wilson.
Oh, absolutely.
He's like the mayor of Pittsburgh right now. He's all over the place. He's going on stage with the Zach Brown band. He's throwing out pitches at PNC Park. The guy's everywhere. He's kissing babies, signing autographs, and everyone's talking about the backup. Great, because everything I've heard from people that are there, yourself, Brian Batko, the PG, Alan Saunders, all these people that are in practice say the same thing. Russ looks great. Like, Russ looks like he doesn't look like a 35-year-old. He looks like he's performing well. He's going to be the guy. If he can stay healthy, he's going to be really good. So, hey, kudos to Russell Wilson. All right. I want to have some fun with you, because we used to have a blast on our podcast, and I was like, at the end of this, I'm gonna ask Chris some fun questions. So first,
right,
how many years have you been in the room? Is it 2017 was your first year?
So I started covering the Steelers for DK Pittsburgh Sports back in the day in 2016. And I think my first time going to a game was 2017 and being in the locker room. And I think my first training camp taste was 2016, but I didn't go to any games that year. But 2017, yeah, was like my first year doing that.
Have you had a pinch yourself moment at any point where it's like, oh my gosh, I'm a kid that grew up in the Pittsburgh area. I love this team. I started out as like a fan writer, and here I am asking Mike Tomlin questions in a press conference setting.
You know, there's been a couple times where I think that like I've been like, it's just like a realization like, hey, I'm here. Cause like the journey to get here. And I tell this to everyone that wants to get into this, because again, I started on BehindTheSteelCurtain.com. I was a law student. I didn't take any journalism classes. I didn't do this the traditional way. I didn't get picked up by the Post-Gazette overnight. Right. It took years to build to this. And it took many thankless nights where you and I were up just chatting on a podcast, and it's just building and building.
Right, exactly.
Much like it takes for these athletes in these practices that we want to break down every second. I did not have a great take every day. And so taking it to get there, it's sometimes you don't stop and look around and smell the roses because you're still working so hard to get to the next thing. Because even like right now, I'm covering Pitt football and Pitt basketball and the Steelers, all doing stuff for the Post-Gazette while doing all these jobs. And then when the fall comes back, I'm doing high school football with Channel 11 and all this other stuff. There's times I don't got time to pinch myself because I'm just looking around like, all right, next thing. But there have been times, Jeff, like there have been times where like I think back to couple of Steelers-Ravens games where it was a big moment and they had a big win, where there was the one at the end of the 2017 season where it was the wild game, like right after Ryan Shazier got paralyzed, and they wore his, Roosevelt Nix wore his shirt, after the kick return. And that was a wild game because I think Stephon Tuitt sacked Flacco, the ball rolled out of bounds and the time expired.
Yes.
And like talking to the Steelers after that was a crazy game. And I was just like, wow, this is crazy. Like, I'm in here. So like that was like 2017. So that was a pinch yourself moment. But there's also, I think the real moment is when like it's the casual times where it's just like you're talking to somebody and like you're acknowledged by one of the people that you talk to. Because like players and coaches, they talk to us. A lot of them don't want to have to. It's just like, we're here. You know why I'm here? Like Marshawn Lynch type of thing. Like they're just filling the quota.
Right, yeah.
But the moments that like where they don't have to do it and they acknowledge you anyway, that's also really appreciated. I've had this with Mike Tomlin where like, one time he walked up to me and he's like, hey, congrats on getting engaged. And I was like, what? Mike Tomlin knows I'm engaged? Like, that's pretty cool. And he was like, yeah, you were like Pittsburgh viral. Like, so like I saw it and I was like, oh, thanks, Mike. That's pretty cool. And then like this really recent one, I was at the Steelers facility, and please don't crush me, people, but I bumped into Cam Hayward on the way out. It was the last day of minicamp, and he just said, hey, Chris, what's up? And I was like, oh, Cam, hey, man, how's it going? And the part of me was like, Cam knew who I was off of site, and he was like, yeah, man. And he asked me how I do all the podcasts that I do, and I'm like, so this guy not only knows who I am, he knows what I do. And I was like, that's pretty cool. That's Mr. Steeler right there. Like that's right. The captain of the team, and he like knows not only who I am but how much work I put in. So I was like, that was kind of a pinch me moment. And there's little moments like that sprinkled throughout. I think that there's also like, the big game where something happened. There's times when you call something out and it happens in the game, and then like people are like, Chris Carter called that out. And a lot of it comes from film study and just talking players. I think a pinch me moment, because one thing else that I do, I try to do is like, coming from where I came from, breaking news was not, when you're coming from the blogosphere into this, that's something that we were particularly, specialized at, because you got to have people inside the building, you got to have friends, you got to build relationships, and that's something that it takes being credentialed to really develop over time. And I've broken some news here and there before, but this past draft class, I was on the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette's North Shore Drive. We did a live broadcast of reacting to the first 2 rounds of the NFL draft, and I had some sources hitting me up, and like, if you were watching that draft class, I didn't have Fautano first, but I said, I was like, I just go on the show and I can't say source, I'm gonna just tell you, Zach Frazier's the next pick. And so, and they were like, what? And I was like, just wait and see. And so it was a few different people, and I just, because when you hear one thing from one person who might know, then you got to confirm it with another person. Right. So, but I'm doing this in live. And it was like when I learned that and I was correct, I was like, we're good. Like we're figuring out. So there's some pinch me moments in there, Jeff.
Cool. All right, let's have some quick questions here.
Sure.
Is there a player that's been the most intimidating to approach for an interview?
These days it's Najee Harris because he does not want to talk to us.
Okay.
But like Najee's not intimidating to me. It's just more so that he just doesn't want to talk. So like when I walk up to Najee, no, and that's it. Like that's fine. Like I can take a no. George Pickens is the same way. He don't talk unless it's like he's forced to talk. But that's not intimidating. I think probably the most, I guess, intimidating was Mike Mitchell in a bad mood. I remember, in fact, it was my first loss that I covered being in the locker room. I talked about losses, but it was the first time being in the locker room right after a rough loss. It was that Bears game that they lost in overtime in early 2017. That was the Villanueva salute game. So there was a lot of drama going on. And it was funny because I thought my most intimidating question would be from Cam Hayward, because I was like, okay, I'll write about the defense. You write about this, you write about that. So I go into the locker room and I see Cam Hayward, and he's like not in a good mood. And I just see him, his fists are balled up and his face is red, and he's and I'm like, and then I look around, I'm like, I guess I got to talk to this guy. So I'm like, hey Cam, you got a second to talk? And he just goes like this. What are your questions? And then he answered them so nicely, and he was super professional. And that's Cam Hayward. He is so physical and mean on the field, but he's so professional off of it. And I'm just like, oh man, that was so easy. What was I worried about? So then I go to Mike Mitchell, and I'm like, hey Mike, you got a second? He's like, I'm not talking. And I was like, oh, okay, but like, could I just get? So I tried to. I was like, could I? I said, I'm not talking. And I was like, oh man, so he's not really talking. And so after that, that might have been like the most. But after that, like getting a simple no from a player, like James Harrison in general is just a scary human being because he's just that big and that physical, and he has that evil demeanor that he's going to crush every person's soul. Maybe he would be up there. James Harrison did scare the snot out of me in the club one time. I'm sorry, I'm rambling. There was this is before I was even a reporter. This is when I was in law school. The Steelers had just lost a game that knocked them out of the playoffs, like out of playoff contention. I want to say it was like 2012, 2013. And I'm in the South Side hanging out with friends, and I'm with my boy Devin, and it's his birthday. And he's like, hey, man, can you pay the DJ to play my song? I'm like, yeah, man, I got you. So we're this one, the S Club, I think it was in the South Side. On the strip, and I go, and so to do this, to get to the DJ was up these steps, and this DJ was next to this private area. So like I'm like walking up there, and I've seen a lot of Steelers floating around, so like they're here and they're partying. So I'm like, like, okay, that's cool. So then I go up to the DJ with my $5, and I'm like, I'm gonna get my man's song played. And then as I get to like the top of the steps where like the private area is like kind of sectioned off, someone like reaches over the railing and taps me, and I turn, and it's James Harrison, like this close, like looking at me in my face. And he's like, who are you? Do I know you? Did you get invited here? And I'm like, Mr. Harrison. I point to my money and I point to the DJ, because I was also like, he is in a bad mood. He is in my face. I've seen him break people on a football field. And I was like, $5 DJ. And he looked at me and he was like, oh, my bad. And I was like, because I just in my brain, like with him, when he was up in my face, I just saw myself flying over this stairwell onto like the dance floor and just being killed. And I was just like, well, that was like my most. Yeah, exactly. So there's that one too.
All right, next question. What would you say are the best and worst parts of the job?
I mean, the best part of the job is when you cover someone through their struggles and you report about it, like what, like you report on, like, hey, they're working through this, they're doing this, and you're there to see them at their toughest moments, but then you see them fight their way through it, and like the that part of their journey where it's like Man, y'all saw me when I was bad. Y'all saw me when things was hard, but now you see me now. I'm on top of the mountain. And I think a great example of that was after the Bengals game, the second Bengals game when Mason Rudolph went off. And we covered me. And not that Mason Rudolph is like the most amazing athlete ever or anything like that. But we covered Mason Rudolph. I was there. I was covering him when he was getting benched, when he wasn't getting respect. And sometimes he just wasn't good. Like it wasn't like he was just, Charlie Brown and everything bad just happened around him. He had some bad luck. I was there covering the game when Earl Thomas knocked him out. And like he was out cold on the field. I wasn't there live for it, but I saw, Myles Garrett hit him over the head with the helmet. I saw him, his collarbone get broken. By the way, all three of those things happened the same season to him, which is just insane. And then to see him in that game, not just throw the touchdowns and win the game and have that moment, but talking to him afterwards when he was like, I was studying for the real estate exam before this season, and we all kind of laugh, and he's like, I'm serious. I thought this was my last year in the NFL. And I was like, whoa. And so then I think Brooke Pryor of ESPN asked a great question, because she said, hey, like after you threw the long touchdown pass to George Pickens, you were like running downfield and you were like yelling at the sideline. He's like, I wasn't yelling at the sideline. I knew exactly where my parents flew in and sat in this game. And that was just me. I made eye contact with them. And I was just like in the moment, just like, can you believe this right now? That is the ultimate high of covering sports, is when you see someone that's just been through it, even if it's just that moment. Like that's of a team that didn't win a playoff game, but to know that man's journey and to see that and to get to cover it and talk about it, that's special that we get to be part of that and help share that story. And I could share several stories like that about not just the Steelers, but also Pitt, because Pitt has a lot of great stories like that too. So that's definitely the best. The worst, I think the worst is when you're disappointed in someone. Like the worst that I've felt doing this is when Antonio Brown was going through his spiral, which is still apparently happening. But not because I'm just a fan of Antonio Brown, because I feel like if you watch football, you were just a fan of the way that he played. He was just a phenomenal player. And you want to see those people, whether they're for the team that you're from, the city you're from. Like, I'm a big fan of the way Justin Jefferson plays right now. And if he went on an AB spiral, I'd be so disappointed in him. But to see that happen in real time, like I remember I was on like Channel 11 and doing like the final word, and you had guys like Mark Madden guys, and they were just laughing about how stupid AB was and things like that. And like, to me, I'm like, there's times that when dumb stuff happens, it's funny, but the stuff that was happening with AB, I'm like, I'm concerned for that dude's kids. I'm concerned for his life. Like the spiral, like you can see it like right now, like he's filing for bankruptcy. What is AB going to be like when he hits rock bottom? Because he has not hit it yet. And I hope that in his brain at some point he realizes this needs to be my rock bottom, and I'm going to fix stuff and get better from there. And his interview on the Pivot showed that at least there was some recognition that he's been messing up, but he still hasn't completely there yet. And so I think the worst thing about it is when you're covering that and you're just, there's that disappointment and just like unfortunate situation of like, man, this person is not doing well mentally or physically or anything like that. Those are tough days, or just bad things happening to guys and having to report those hard moments. And that to me is it. It's not about the teams. It's more about the players. Like the worst I've ever felt in working sports is I was there in Cincinnati when Ryan Shazier got paralyzed. And I remember like him being down after the hit and thinking like, okay, well, Shazier's hurt. It's happened. And then he wasn't moving, and we were all like, oh God. And I remember when they put him on the stretcher and took him off the field. And I remember looking around and like, I'm like, I don't care about the game anymore. And like, that's never happened in my football watching life. And I don't think it's happened since that I've been like this, maybe the DeMar Hamlin incident. I wasn't covering that game, but like, I knew DeMar from his Pitt days, and I was like, oh, this is terrifying. I hope that he lives. And the same thing with Ryan, like, those moments when people are just going through things, even if they're of their own volition, like AB, it's just, those are the things that I don't like to cover, because, you still got to do it. You still got to be professional. You still got to talk about it, like I have with Shazier, Antonio Brown, and several other bad things that have happened to players, and including, Cameron Sutton right now with what happened with his allegations. But I'd say that's the worst part, is when you have to do those because those aren't fun. Those aren't happy, but those are part of the job, and you better do them, and you better do them right.
Yeah. Well, this probably won't mean much to you, man, but we go back a long time. Probably back to like 2015 or something like that. You were doing film.
2013. Yeah. Like,
good God.
Like I think back to it. Like, I remember I used to back when you and Neil wouldn't let me be on the podcast all the time. I had to like work the phone lines. I think that was the 2014 season.
I think you're right.
When you started that. So, but either way, mid-2010s.
Yeah. So we've been, doing this for a long time, and I can honestly say, man, I'm super proud of you. And when I'm watching a Mike Tomlin press conference and I hear your voice and he gets pissed off, and I'm like, Chris got him. Yes.
Listen,
I'm proud as hell of you. And I know that title doesn't mean much, but man, keep doing what you're doing and keep doing your thing, because we are grinders, and people don't understand it. Like, when you get these beat writers that came up and they went to journalism school and they're typically used to writing 1 article a day and their job is done. Shoot, man, we came up where you're writing 3 to 4 a day and you're just trying to keep your head above water as you deal with the rest of your life as well, man. So super glad that you're always willing to come on the show. Absolutely. And super proud of you, man.
Thank you. It means a lot to hear that from you, Jeff, especially again, like, similar to we're talking about the journeys. You saw me at some really rough times when I was broke.
Absolutely.
When I was fresh out of law school, I have no money. I was in debt to the government for all my loans that I had to take out. And I was just like, I'm still in debt to the government. I'll pay you in a couple of weeks, Uncle Sam. But at the same time, like, you saw me through there, and to know that you see me now and that we still are still friends and we can still talk like this, it means a lot. Because now I do work for the Post-Gazette, and I get to write, 1 article a day and just be happy. And I'm like, this isn't that bad, but I also know what it's like when you can't do that and you have to do that. So it means a lot to hear that acknowledgement from you, my friend, because you, sir, you've been a grinder. You've been an example, I think, to everyone out there about the hustle that is needed to be good in this business, because, sir, you are good in this business.
I appreciate that, man. That means a lot to me. So go ahead and plug your socials, your Locked On podcast, and all the other stuff that you're doing. Go ahead and do that now.
Absolutely. You can find me. My name's Christopher Carter. You can find me at Carter Critiques on Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, whatever. I'm on all the socials there with that handle at Carter Critique. You can read my work at the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. Go to post-gazette.com. I primarily cover Pitt football and Pitt basketball for them, but I also dabble in Steelers. I also host their North Shore Drive podcast, so subscribe to that every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. You can also find me on the Locked On Steelers podcast every Monday through Friday, talking about the Pittsburgh Steelers and all of those. Same way you find this, your favorite podcasting apps, YouTube. Like this video, subscribe to this video if you subscribe to this channel if you haven't already. And if you're enjoying this show, maybe you'll enjoy my shows in the North Shore Drive podcast as well as Locked On Steelers. You can also find me at Channel 11 WPXI, where I do a ton of work for them as well on the Steelers, Pitt, and everything else sports. I think that's all my jobs, Jeff. I think I might be missing one.
You're second only to Tim Benz in terms of the number of jobs.
Tim got it, man. Tim can go. He does everything. I'm like, look, we someday we both want to get out of having to do everything, but
I bet
it is nice to be appreciated, employed.
There you go. All right, Chris, man. Hey, enjoy it. Have a good week. Enjoy this lull before training camp. We'll talk soon. Take it easy.